This video is going to be a very short introduction to rewilding, which is a fairly recent approach to how we deal with conservation, a new lens for thinking about things that has become quite popular, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about what's meant. People use it in different ways. Hi folks, my name is Taran. I'm here to help you make connections between environmental science and environmental issues. What I want to do with this video is help you understand how rewilding is thought about in the scientific literature right now so that you can form your own opinions about what you think about rewilding. This video is also going to be the first in a series of rewilding videos where I break down what the key issues are, what are the important components that are built into what makes rewilding unique or a little different from other approaches in conservation, and what I think the big risks are. So with that, let's get started. I think the main point to keep in mind when you're trying to think about what rewilding is and how it might be different from other things is that firstly, it's a type of conservation approach. So we are mostly familiar with this idea of traditional environmental conservation, where we do our best to protect ecosystems and the lands and keep them in whatever condition they're currently in. Rewilding shifts that focus a little bit from just protecting what is currently there to improving what is there. Now, what improving means is up for a lot of debate, and people think about this quite differently, and this is an open discussion, but this is generally the idea, that it's not just about protecting and keeping things in a certain condition, but it's about making that condition better, environmentally, ecologically, in some way that matters to people. And a key part of that is that rewilding isn't mutually exclusive with other forms of conservation. And so generally the idea is that these techniques and these things that we know about how to protect ecosystems are used together with these new rewilding approaches for how to restore ecosystems or improve their condition. So what actually makes up rewilding? I would say, trying to summarize most of the scientific literature and the discussion of people in the activist community, rewilding boils down to three core ideas. The first of those ideas is restoring places where you have large core ecosystems that have very small amounts, minimal human interference. You can imagine this as unbroken blocks of forest, but it's not necessarily forest. Rewilding applies to forests, grasslands, wetlands, marine ecosystems, any ecosystem. The same ideas apply. But one of the key ideas is making sure that there are these blocks of ecological system that don't have lots of busy roads running through them, they don't have human buildings in them. And one of the most important ideas is that there are places where natural disturbance is allowed to take place. Disturbance can be a whole range of different things. It can be things like floods, it can be forest fires. These are things that we tend to shut down when they happen in human communities to the best of our ability because they're destructive and dangerous. But for many ecological systems, these are events that are really important parts of succession as different species move in and take over, or reproductive dynamics for different species. So having these core ecological blocks where there's not a lot of human activity going on can be really important for having ecological stability and productivity. The second key point in rewilding is building what people call corridors. These are pathways of movement and migration for species between these core blocks of stable, continuous ecosystem. These are really important for a few reasons. One really basic one, especially for big species that aren't super abundant, is it means that they can travel around and find mates. You may not have a lot of reproductive options in your local patch, and so you can move to another system nearby. The other important benefit of corridors is that if a really bad disaster happens in one region, What that means is that a species that's maybe wiped out locally can then recolonize from a neighboring patch without humans having to do a whole reintroduction process and using already very limited conservation funds on that project. The third aspect of rewilding, and this is the one that I think is the most iconic, that most attracts people and captures the imaginations of people when they hear about rewilding and start getting interested in it as an approach, is species reintroductions. This, like the other categories, often gets called by different names. Some people think about it just as carnivores. Some people call it trophic rewilding, food web restoration. In my research, I'm a food web ecologist, so I tend to think about this in terms of restoring food webs. But the basic idea is that having a diversity of species that fill different ecological niches in an ecosystem is a really important part of it being stable and productive and providing ecological services to human communities locally, regionally, globally, out into the future. And so in the current heavily degraded context that is most ecosystems in the planet, restoring species that have been lost is a really big part of how we improve them, how we take them to states where they are more stable and more productive and more diverse. The discussions about which species to reintroduce, how to think about what's the right baseline in time, what kind of historical ecosystem, if you are trying to restore a historical ecosystem, these are all open debates. They're specific to what the individual region and the site is. But a lot of the most heated discussions in rewilding come down to what species do you reintroduce to an ecosystem. Those three components make up the core of what I think most people are talking about when they're talking about rewilding. When someone is bringing up rewilding as a conservation measure or a political issue, usually what they're talking about is going to be some mixture of that building core ecological systems connected by pathways of movement for species and reintroducing some species that have been lost to those systems. And while there are, in my opinion, good reasons to want to do it, there are some substantial barriers. Some of those barriers are scientific, and some of them are political. The scientific barriers are things that we are in the process of overcoming already. We need rigorous assessment systems so that when a rewilding project is being done, we can tell whether it's working, whether it's not working, and if it's not working, why it's not working, and how to do it better in the future. Core part of doing any science well. And we also need better models for making predictions into the future to save us a lot of the hassle of failed experiments and make predictions into the future about how these projects are going to turn out. Saves us money, saves us time. The most substantial barrier that rewilding faces is, I think, one of environmental justice. It is an unfortunate reality of the world in which we live that a lot of the land seen as most suitable for rewilding projects is also home to some of the world's most threatened rural minority communities. And so if rewilding is to take off, be seen as a productive, useful tool in our project to make the living world a stable, more healthy place, it's going to be vital that these relationships are built from a place of humility and patience and working together for mutually agreeable solutions. I think what really inspires people about rewilding is that it is a positive, affirming solution to environmental problems in a way that we don't often get. So much of what conservation and caring about the environment is playing defense all the time. It's trying to stop climate change from happening. It's trying to stop the oceans from being full of plastic. It's trying to stop elephants from being hunted to extinction. And there's been very little room for people to say, okay, so what can I do to make things better? Not just prevent this slow spiraling into collapse that we feel like we're in, but what can I do to heal, to repair, to improve things. And I think it's rewilding as that positive, optimistic vision that we can take these places that are damaged, where we have, where we feel like we've lost historically, and we can undo that loss by improving it, restoring it to some condition that is better in whatever way we may judge that to be the case. This positive, affirming vision comes with a lot of hard questions. It requires us to ask deeply about what our relationship to the land is, what we imagine the goal state of ecosystems to be. We have to deal with the science and our social relationships in new and sometimes really difficult ways. But at the end of that, if it is done well, we have opportunities that we've never had before. If you liked this video, if you want to hear more about rewilding, if you want to get into some of the underlying scientific details of these ideas, then hit like, hit subscribe, and let's talk about it.